She led 20,000 men into battle, yet no one saw her fall. She carved her name into stone walls that still rise above the earth, but no one knows where her bones lie beneath it. They called her queen, warrior, legend. Some whispered she was born under the sign of a blood moon. Others swore she vanished into the sands, taking her secrets with her. What is truth when the mouth of history trembles in fear before speaking her name? This is not a tale of comfort. This is the unblinking shadow of a life that burned too brightly for the world that birthed her. This is the story of Queen Amina of Zazzau, and the legacy she never meant to leave behind. Close your door, dim your lights, and don't look away. Not until her footsteps fade into the dust. Before the lines of nations were drawn in foreign ink, before flags of strangers fluttered in the winds of Africa, there was a name. Not a name written in ink, but in war cries, in earth, in blood, and in memory. A name they tried to bury beneath textbooks in silence. But the wind still whispers it. Amina. They say she was born of fire, that her first cry cracked the stillness of night like a war drum. They say her feet touched sand and the ground remembered. She was not born to be a queen. She was born to be the story they couldn't erase. The land called her daughter. The sword called her master. And history never called her loud enough. Because when they write tales of conquest, they rarely write of queens. And when they do, they forget the ones who conquered. Not for empires, but for memory, for her people, for legacy. Amina of Zazzau. She reigned in a time when men called women ghosts in battle, silent, unseen, irrelevant. But she spoke, with fire, with strategy, with steel, and the earth. The earth moved for her. So who was she? A ruler, a killer, a savior, a storm in the skin of a woman? This is not a legend. This is not folklore. This is the true story of Queen Amina of Zazzau. And it begins where the world tried to forget. They say the sky turned red the night she was born. No thunder, no rain, just wind and silence. The kind of silence that feels like the earth itself is listening. In the ancient city of Zazzau, in a room carved from sandstone and scent of incense, a cry pierced the night, sharp, fierce, almost defiant. It was not a newborn's cry. It was the call of something older, something returning. Her mother, the queen herself, named her Amina. But the village priestess, the one with no eyes but who saw everything, whispered another name under her breath. She who will command. And then she laughed. Not the queen, the baby. They say Amina laughed as her father held her in his arms for the first time, like she had just remembered something he hadn't yet learned. From that day, the city watched her with quiet fear and quiet hope. Because in Zazzau, daughters were born to be given. But Amina, she was born to be taken back by the gods, or made into one. By the time she could walk, she was running. By the time she could talk, she was arguing. And by the time she was 10, she had stolen her brother's war maps, locked herself in the council room, and declared herself the new general. They say she once tied palm fronds to a goat's back, painted tribal stripes on its face, and marched it into court dressed like a warrior. If this goat can be brave, she shouted, why not me? They punished her, of course, or tried. She spent her week of exile, sneaking into the armory, memorizing sword weights, learning how men's fear lived not in their muscles, but in the stories they avoided. Amina didn't just defy tradition, she rearranged it, piece by piece, and no one dared stop her, not for long. Her mother, Queen Bakwa Turunku, was no stranger to fire. She ruled beside her husband, but never behind him. And in the privacy of night, she whispered truths into Amina's ears, lessons not meant for princesses, but for predators. Power is not handed to daughters, she told her. It is taken like a sword from fire, slowly, with pain. And once it is yours, you cannot drop it, even when your hands bleed. And Amina would nod, solemn, even at 9. She didn't blink when told of assassins. She didn't flinch at the word betrayal. Her only question was, when do I begin? Her father, the Sarkin of Zaza, was harder to impress, stern, battle-worn. But even he couldn't deny the sharpness in her gaze. One evening, he found her watching the soldiers train. Instead of scolding her, he handed her a wooden sword. It's not the blade, he said. It's who stands behind it. She trained in secret, under stars, beside her father. And when no one was watching, she whispered to the wind, I will not wait for power. I will ride toward it. But even fire has its enemies, and innocence doesn't last in royal halls. One night, she caught a servant sneaking into her mother's chambers with a dagger under his robe. She didn't scream. She followed. She tackled him from behind. She saved the queen and was told to stay silent. That was the first night she learned that the palace had more blades than the battlefield, and some of them smiled during the day. Amina's childhood wasn't stolen. It was forged, in fire, whispers, and quiet victories no one recorded. And while others were still dreaming of love and gold, she was already dreaming of maps, soaked in red. The girl who marched a goat into court would one day march warriors into kingdoms. But before she wore the crown, she'd have to break it first. Because even in the north, no throne ever welcomes a queen without blood. Before Amina was a queen, she was a shadow. And before she led armies, she fought wars no one saw coming. At 15, she was still barred from war councils. Her name wasn't whispered in matters of strategy or conquest. She was royal, yes, but female, decorative, observed, not heard. But she listened. The secret that walked in silence. Every night after dusk, when the last courtier's sandals had swept the floors, and the last tale had been sung around the fires, Amina would sneak out. Dressed in sand-colored cloth, face hidden, she crept past guards who never thought to question another stable boy or servant. She didn't go to the gardens. She went to the barracks. And there, behind old grain storages and stacks of spears, the daughter of Zazo trained, not with silk, with steel. Her first mentor, the Ghost General. They called him Malam Yaro, the Ghost General, retired, cast aside. Too many scars, they said, too much war in his eyes. But Amina saw something else. A man unbound by courtly rules. A man who didn't care if a warrior bled every month, as long as they bled others better. He didn't speak much. He didn't bow. But on one condition, he trained her. If you fall, don't cry, he said. If you bleed, don't stop. If they ask who taught you, say it was your rage. Clash of shadows. She sparred with boys twice her size, cloaked in darkness and firelight. Her body bruised, her palms blistered, and she laughed through it. When the other trainees asked her name, she gave none. They called her Mai Shiru, the quiet one. But her silence didn't last long. One night, she beat the best among them. A boy from Kano, noble blood, sharp tongue. He accused her of cheating. She broke his nose and whispered, "Then next time, don't bring a mouth to a sword fight." The secret letters, but not everything was blood and war. In those nights, she met him. The captain with eyes like thunderclouds and hands calloused by battle. He never asked her to be anything less than dangerous. He taught her how to twist a spear. She taught him how to twist words. They never spoke of love aloud, but in the folds of their practice scrolls, they left messages. "If I ruled Zazao," she wrote, "would you still teach me, or run?" He answered with a blade, one made for her hand, lighter than iron, but sharper than truth. Her first real sword. The mock battle. On the final day of training, the general devised a game, a mock war, strategy, Disguise. Capture the banner. The teams were chosen, and no one picked her. She smiled and disappeared. Minutes passed. Then, screams. Amina had infiltrated the enemy camp, disguised as a water girl. She took their flag and left a note in its place. You were watching the wrong girl. That night, for the first time, they asked her name. And this time, she gave it. But shadows have eyes. But the palace is never blind for long. Whispers returned to the royal court. A girl trains in secret, they said. She fights like a ghost. Her brother, then prince, summoned her. Not to punish, to warn. They fear what you're becoming, he told her. And soon, they will try to stop it. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She simply said, let them try. By 16, Amina had mastered every tactic known to Zaria. By 17, she had written her own. She wasn't just a princess anymore, she was a storm gathering. Quiet, fast, waiting for the first flash of betrayal. The throne was still her brother's, but the power was already shifting, and the palace had no idea how fast shadows could move when they had her name. They trained her in secret. They will regret that in public. The price of power is never written in gold. It's written in silence, in poison, in shadows that move when no one else can see them. Sarkin Zaria, her father, was dying, and the palace knew it before he did. Some say the sickness was natural. Others say it came from inside the court, hidden in honey, masked in meat. But Amina knew better. She'd seen the eyes of courtiers sharpen. She'd heard whispers in corridors that grew colder each night. Her father didn't fall ill. He was being erased. On the night his voice turned to ash, Amina stood at his bedside. Not as a daughter, as something older, more final. They will come for you, he said. They will drag your name through the sand. But your sword must guard what your crown will wear. He pricked her thumb with a blade carved from lion bone, and with his last breath, he whispered a name she'd never heard before. Hers. Her true name. It was not Amina. It was a word the desert itself remembered. When the king died, the palace did not weep. It paused. Her brother, Karama, was crowned king. But something had shifted. Amina's presence grew heavier. She stood taller, spoke sharper, and the people began to look to her. At council meetings, she answered before he did. On military matters, she was consulted privately. Her brother began to fade. One night, Karama summoned her to the highest tower. No guards, no pretense. You were born for war, he told her, but war has no crown. Let me wear it in peace. Amina didn't argue. She only smiled. And in her smile, he saw the end of his reign. Not long after, a faction of nobles, old blood, bitter tongues, plotted to remove her. They planned to intercept her on the way to a ceremonial feast. But Amina, who once trained in silence, heard everything. On the night of the feast, she arrived not in royal robes, but in armor. She placed the scroll with their names on the banquet table, then looked each traitor in the eye. If you'd plotted better, I might have respected you, she said. But now you're just names I no longer need to remember. The throne did not welcome her. It feared her, but it knew her. And so, Queen Amina rose, not with ceremony, but with silence. No crown placed on her head, only her hand resting on her sword. She abolished courtiers who spoke in riddles. She promoted warriors who bled beside her. She built walls taller than any Zaria had ever seen, not just of stone, but of will. And then, she turned her eyes outward. The north was not enough. Not for a queen forged in battle. She would ride, and the earth itself would make room. On her first ride as queen, the people watched with mouths half open, unsure whether to cheer or kneel. She rode a massive stallion with a split-colored face, one side light, the other dark. She called him Two-Face. When asked why, she grinned and said, "He looks peaceful until he doesn't, just like me." But power makes enemies, and blood remembers its debts. Amina had claimed Zaria, but far beyond the walls, rival kingdoms watched her rise with clenched fists and sharpened steel. In the shadows, alliances were forming. In the markets, spies were whispering. And deep in the heart of Quararafa, a message was sent. One word, one name. Amina. She had taken the throne. Now, they would test if she could hold it. They say the heat of war doesn't burn the same twice. That once the blood of kings touches the sand, the ground remembers. And in the fourth act of Queen Amina's reign, the land remembered everything. She was no longer the girl who trained in the shadows, no longer the daughter of a dying king, no longer the wild warrior who once tied a royal goat to a drum. No, by now, she was the fire that ate everything it touched. Her army had swelled. Over 20,000 riders, wrapped in deep indigo and leather. Swords so clean, they flashed like mirrors. Amina didn't just conquer villages. She redefined borders, built cities, like chapters, named roads after her own war cries. And every time she claimed new land, she left behind a single red stone. Not two, not a flag, no inscription, just a red stone. Smooth, cold, placed at the center of each city square, like a punctuation mark made from blood. No one asked why. No one dared. Some believed the stones were protection. Others whispered it was tribute. Each stone, a soul owed. But in truth, only Amina knew what they meant, and she never said. Not once. But while her kingdom grew on the outside, cracks were forming within. They didn't show up as revolts or riots. They showed up as silence, as eyes that didn't meet hers, as messengers who arrived too fast with the wrong seal, as servants who suddenly forgot their own names. Whispers began to leak, like blood from a stitched wound. Someone is feeding your plans to Quararafa. The enemy moves before we do. There is a traitor in your court. And so, Queen Amina changed. She stopped trusting her tongue. She started watching shadows instead. At council, she told lies on purpose. Told one general they'd ride east, another she'd ride west, only to head north. The army who waited there, already prepared. Someone had spoken. But when the northern rebels attacked first, only one of her council remained dry-eyed. That was enough. She knew who the traitor was, but she didn't punish them. Not yet. No. Queen Amina believed in games, and that's how she created one of her most legendary moves. She left her palace alone, dressed not as a queen, but as a market girl. A scarf across her head, dust on her face, no guards, no horses, just her, and a small pouch of coin. She walked into the largest market in Kano, challenged the strongest local man to a wrestling match in the open square. "If I win," she said, "you owe me a secret. And if you win, then you can say you beat a market girl at her own game." He laughed, but she didn't blink. She threw him in 2 moves. The crowd roared, and the man, confused, embarrassed, humbled, became her new eyes in the court. That man would later save her life. But not before a final warning arrived. From a source she had long avoided, the Bori priestess. "You rule the land, Queen Amina, but the land rules back." "What are you saying?" "Every time you take a soul, the stone remembers. Your strength feeds the ground, but one day, it will starve your soul." Amina turned away that night. But she didn't sleep, because a shadow was growing in her own halls, and it wore familiar robes. Empires don't collapse when the enemy arrives. They collapse when the fire inside begins to turn cold. And Queen Amina's fire was starting to look back at her. She had expanded the map, built walls high enough to touch wind, named cities that still whisper her name. But now, her nights were full of questions. Who can I trust? Who watches while I sleep? And what if the next red stone is mine? They rode into legend, but only silence returned. It began with silence. Not the kind you hear at night when the birds sleep, but the kind that seeps into your bones when something old, something sacred, is about to break. Queen Amina stood alone in her war tent. Maps curled at the corners. Her sword leaned against a stool, carved with the faces of past rulers. The wind outside howled, like it knew this was the last time it would touch her armor. They had come for her, not with swords, not with drums, but with whispers. A coalition, 5 kings, former allies, now bound by fear, because one queen had done what no man had. And when men fear what they cannot become, they conspire to destroy it. The letter reached her court late that night, an intercepted scroll, bound with twine and betrayal. Inside it, a name, her name, signed under the promise of execution. The council panicked, her generals swore blood, her younger sister wept. But Queen Amina, she smiled. They say she turned her gaze to the horizon and said, "Then I will ride into their fear and teach them what it means to challenge fire." Before dawn, she summoned no council. She gave no farewell speech. She wrote a single letter, and in it, sealed the truth of her life. A truth the world would never know, because cowards would burn it before it could be read. Then, without a sound, without a drum, Queen Amina of Zazzau mounted her horse and rode alone into legend. Her army waited. 1 day, then 2, then 5. Riders were sent, north, west, into the hills, into the valleys, where she had once carved roads with her victory. Nothing. On the 7th day, a scout returned with her horse. Alone. No blood, no wound. Just the queen's red scarf, tied to the saddle, and a stone, warm, to the touch. The council burned her letter. They said it was cursed, said no woman should know such power, such clarity, such command. And so, history paused, not because she died, but because they were afraid of what she left behind. To this day, there is no grave, no shrine, no statue that can contain her spirit, because Amina was never meant to rest. She was forged for movement. She was born in motion. She is motion. You may find her in the beat of drums before battle, in the voice of a girl who dares to lead, in the silence of men who tremble when her name is whispered across the dunes. She rode into silence, but her story never stopped moving. She is not gone. She is just not done yet. If you've made it to this point, you've carried her memory further than her enemies ever could. Let her name echo once more. Drop her name in the comments, Queen Amina. Say it, so they know she's still riding. Whispered at first, then builds gradually. The desert wind never forgets. It carries the echoes of swords drawn beneath crimson skies, and the footsteps of a queen who walked taller than her enemies ever imagined. Her name was Amina, daughter of Bakwa Turunku, warrior of Zazzau, ruler of walls that still hold the breath of history, and yet, no one saw her die. She rode out into the horizon, with a horse cloaked in red, armor as quiet as silence itself, and never came back. No tomb, no marker, no bones beneath the earth. Just stories. But stories, oh, they live longer than flesh. They shape kingdoms. They break time. You see, when power grows too bright, history blinks. When a woman dares to lead with steel instead of softness, the scribes hesitate. They sharpen their quills, but they don't write her truth. They erase, they distort, or worse, they reduce. Queen Amina was not reduced. She commanded armies when others were told to stay silent. She built walls when men warned her to stay within them. She turned dust into empire, fear into strategy, and heartbreak into conquest. Some say she died in battle. Some whisper she vanished in the mountains. Others say she lives still, in the bloodlines of those who speak her name under moonlight, not because they know her, but because they feel her. History teaches you about kings, but legends whisper about queens like her. She didn't wait for her name to be written. She carved it into stone, into land, into the memory of those who never expected her to rise, and watched as she did. Zaria still stands, her walls still whisper, and sometimes when the wind blows just right, you can hear her war cry beneath the rustle of acacia trees. They tried to bury her story, but how do you bury someone who never stopped moving? Now, we ask you this. If her life were a series, would you watch it? If her story was a film, would you tell others? Because if you made it to this moment, if her breath still lingers in your ears, then you're part of the legacy too. Legends don't ask for applause, but they deserve to be remembered. This was the true story of Queen Amina of Zazzau. Thank you for keeping her alive. If her spirit moved you, leave a comment. If her fire inspired you, share this story. Subscribe, because more legends await those who still believe.